If we've not met before, then hey, I'm Jane. I'm a recipe developer and food writer. I live on a little farm in Cornwall, and I try to have as many adventures in my van Noodle as humanly possible. I usually travel with Johnny, aka the Grumpy Builder, and Sunny, my Romanian rescue dog. Now, we're about to head off on a month-long road trip, but between that juicy winter road trip around France that gobbled up all of my savings, some unexpectedly large bills, and some van work we're getting done whilst on the road, we're going to be travelling on a much tighter budget than we used to. In fact, things are so tight this month that we probably should be staying at home and eating baked beans for the month. But Johnny'd already booked the time off work, and after a few years of personal struggles, we know that life is way too short to always be taking the sensible option. Adventure is our love language. So what the hell? Now at this point, I just need to add that what might be a tight budget for us may still be excessive spending for some. Likewise, our budget may be unrealistically strict for others. Our situation, just like yours, is entirely unique to us, so please remember that and approach with kindness if chatting with others in the comments of this video. Now, before we get into the numbers, here's a quick lowdown on the van. We own Noodle the van outright, we don't have any payments on it. I've also just renewed our insurance on her, which was a hefty £480 for the year. This rate is higher than most as I use the van in my business, i.e. here on YouTube, on my blog and on social media, therefore I have to have business cover. However, a quick word of warning to anyone out there that shares their travel adventures on YouTube, as several insurers refuse to insure me because they class my vehicle as being in the public eye. And those that will insure me charge me more. Now, I don't have a choice as I need to have business cover, but if you're not currently earning any income from YouTube or social media, then I would recommend thinking very carefully before letting your insurance company know that you share details of your van online. So to help me budget for this trip, I took the numbers from our 6-week French road trip and I adjusted them to have a weekly cost for each category, i.e. food over the 6 weeks cost £870.36. I divided that by 6 and I came up with £145 and 6p a week. I still can't believe we spent that much per week. Yikes. So with that in mind, let's have a look at what we're going to try and do differently. So food was by far our biggest expense, and this is the main category that I'm planning on making some serious savings. So instead of just wandering aimlessly around the supermarket picking up whatever looks delicious, I'm planning our meals ahead of time. We're going to be going into the store with a list and we are paying cash. And on this road trip, I'm probably going to have to forego visiting my beloved farm shops and instead opting for cheaper supermarkets like Lidl and Aldi, as I absolutely cannot be trusted around good food. Unfortunately, our diets are a little bit different too. I can't eat gluten or cow's milk products, whereas Johnny absolutely can and absolutely does. For breakfast, he buys oats in bulk at home, so he'll be taking oats along and having porridge for most breakfasts, whereas I try to keep most of my meals low carb, so I'll likely be having eggs and homemade keto bread in the mornings. Then there's going to be one cooked meal a day, which will be probably quite carb heavy, plus then a fridge meal like sandwiches or leftovers too. Now the joint food budget is just for those 3 meals a day, along with any fruit or snacks that we both eat. I don't really drink alcohol, so any wine or beer Johnny wants will come out of his own pocket, and the same goes for any junk food that either of us want. I'm taking along a small slow cooker too, which is going to run off the solar power, and I plan to cook joints of meat instead of buying small packets of deli meat. Price difference here would likely make your hair curl, almost as much as mine, and I'll be sure to share the savings with you once we're actually on the road. Actually, if you're interested in a dedicated video on how we save money on groceries whilst away in the van, let me know in the comments down below and I'll get planning. So fuel is an inevitable cost on a road trip, but there are a few things we can do to reduce these costs a little. Firstly, I plan to price check garages for diesel prices when we're down to about quarter to a half of a tank. A few pence per litre doesn't feel like a lot, but it can really add up over the hundreds of miles that we do on a road trip. I'll be using a free app called Petrol Prices. We also plan to drive for economy over speed, so on motorways we'll sit around 55-60 miles an hour and we'll tuck in behind trucks. On smaller roads, we'll take it easy and try to avoid the stop-start thing too much. Once the van is loaded with us, our stuff, and a full tank of water and fuel, it's obviously pretty heavy. That increases fuel costs. So I've already started taking the dead weight out of the van. You know, those things that end up in the back of a cupboard that are there just in case, but you've never actually used. And I'm even thinking of draining the fresh water tank for the drive up the motorway, as water is heavy. And then there are those other motoring tips like keeping the windows closed on motorways to avoid drag, checking tyre pressure regularly, switching off aircon. Not that we have aircon, but some of you fancy folk with fancy rigs probably do. And apparently all those little things can add up to make quite a difference too. In terms of how many miles we plan to actually do, originally our plan was to head north to Scotland and spend a month in the Highlands. Regular viewers will know that my heart is in Scotland and I'm desperate to get back to those mountains. However, the Highlands are a bloody long way from Cornwall, which will result in a very hefty diesel bill. So our backup plan is spending the month in Wales instead. We likely won't make the final decision until we're actually on the road, so stay tuned for that. But wherever we do end up, we'll be avoiding large towns and cities and very touristy places, as A, these usually come with more temptations and higher expenses, and B, well, you know, people. The eating out category wasn't a huge spend in France for us, but I still cut it from £30 a week to £10 a week. As we're totally self-sufficient, having a kitchen on board, I could zero it out, but I wanted to give us a little bit of wriggle room in case we really fancied a coffee out or maybe a bag of chips. Also, when we're at home, we go out for breakfast every weekend. It's our date night, if you like, and it usually costs between £20 and £25. We both have eggs Benedict and coffee, and it's lovely and we love it, but instead of looking for cute little cafes along the way, on this trip alone, we plan to make Eggs Benedict in the van as a special treat once a week at a fraction of the price. Whilst we're not planning on doing anything touristy that costs money, having a £5 a week available for unexpected parking charges or similar felt sensible. If we zero out a category and then end up having to spend something on that category unexpectedly, then obviously we have to move the money from another category, and those other categories, they're already tight enough for my liking. Thank you very much. The maintenance costs. So you never know what's going to happen on the road. Like, who would have thought that the windscreen we'd had professionally fitted would have started leaking like a sieve whilst we were in France? So this is just a little pot for minor mends we might need. Major breakdowns or big spends on the van will have to go on a credit card, unfortunately. Oh, and our cam belt needs changing, so we've booked in with a guy to fix that when we're actually on our travels. It's going to cost £650, but we've already put that money aside for that bill. Now, talking laundry, in France we averaged a weekly spend of £8.11 on laundry, so I rounded it up to a tenner just to make the numbers easier to play with. In France, the DIY revolution machines were everywhere, but I've got a feeling that they may be a little bit harder to find in rural Scotland or rural Wales, so it will be interesting to see what this actually costs us. I'm also thinking we might try and eke the laundry out to every 10 days or so rather than every week, depending obviously on how grubby we get along the way. Now, whilst we were in France, we actually only stayed on 2 campsites in 6 whole weeks. The first was because it was a really touristy area and there were no wild camping spots available, and the second campsite that we stayed on was purely because we were desperate for a shower. So bearing that in mind, that wild camping options are great in both Scotland and Wales, I'm hoping that we can avoid campsites altogether this time. But I have budgeted £5 a week in case we want to get a shower at a leisure centre or swimming pool. So if we can stick to this budget, then our weekly spend is going to go from a dramatic this per week to a much more restrained this per week. And now, my friends, I'm handing this video over to you. Which of my categories would you choose to cut more or boost, and why? What else can we save on? What else have I forgotten? Leave all of your top money-saving road trip ideas down in the comments below, and please remember to be kind. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to join us on the road trip to God knows where, and I guess I'll see you on the road soon. Bye.